In the early 2010s, Kris Wu's rise looked like the cleanest kind of modern fairy tale. Trainee to idol, idol to global brand to untouchable. He debuted with EXO, stepped into China's biggest market at exactly the right time, and built the kind of fame that doesn't just sell songs, it sells lifestyles. Luxury houses, magazine covers, primetime variety shows, blockbuster roles. The image wasn't merely popular, it was engineered certainty. This is the face of the era. Then, in 2021, the story flipped so fast that the industry didn't have time to negotiate its usual soft landing. Sponsors began cutting ties, headlines multiplied, and the online conversation became a flood. Accusation, denial, receipts, counterclaims, and a public demand for consequences that felt bigger than any one celebrity. This case file is not here to farm rumors. It's here to map how a modern superstar collapses when a narrative stops being marketing and becomes law. Because Kris Wu's scandal wasn't just a celebrity scandal. It became a systems story, the power imbalance between fame and ordinary people, the way social media can accelerate accountability, and the way the legal system moves in silence, then returns with a verdict that can't be scrolled past. Here's the hook that keeps viewers watching. This was a man who had everything that usually protects celebrities: money, status, connections, PR muscle, and he still ended up with a prison sentence that rewrote his name into a caution sign. So we're going to do this the off-camera way. Timeline first. The rise that built the myth? The cracks that started as whispers. The moment the allegations turned into a criminal case. The closed-door trial that the public couldn't watch. The verdict, the appeal, and the final door that slammed shut. And at the end, we'll ask the most uncomfortable question the internet rarely answers honestly. When a superstar falls, was the scandal the problem, or the culture that made the superstar feel impossible to touch? Here's what made the rise feel unstoppable. He wasn't only famous, he was exportable. He could cross markets, cross languages, cross platforms. In a media economy built on global, that kind of profile turns a person into infrastructure. The audience doesn't just follow, it builds routines around the star, streams, edits, fan wars, loyalty tests. And when you're that central to people's daily dopamine, any accusation feels personal to the fan base, and any punishment feels political to the industry. So when the first cracks surfaced publicly, the stakes were already loaded. This wasn't going to be a quiet scandal handled by one press conference. It was going to be a collision between fandom, brands, and the state. 5 different versions of truth fighting for control of one name. Stay with the timeline, because the shock isn't only how fast the story collapsed. The shock is how long the myth had been treated as unbreakable, until one summer forced every gate to open at once. Kris Wu's story begins with the classic K-pop machine: training, branding, and a debut designed to feel inevitable. In EXO, he became instantly recognizable: stage presence, bilingual image, the global member archetype that made a group feel international. But the most important move in his timeline wasn't just debuting, it was leaving. When he pivoted to China, he entered a market where celebrity can scale faster than anywhere on Earth. The equation is simple. Platforms amplify, brands attach, and fandom becomes an economy. He wasn't only a musician. He became a complete product: music, acting, endorsements, social clout, and an aspirational persona that made him valuable to corporations that needed a safe, youthful symbol. This is where the case file sets a trap for the viewer. Because the higher the brand climbs, the more it starts to feel like the brand is reality. Fans defend the image as if defending a friend. Sponsors defend the image because it protects their investment. Media defends the image because it drives clicks. The celebrity becomes a shared asset, so everyone has an incentive to keep the asset stable. And stability is the enemy of scrutiny. In the years before the collapse, the public mostly saw polished output: red carpets, curated interviews, controlled messaging. If anything troubling existed in the background, it stayed there, because the system around major stars is designed to keep controversy off the main stage. But that design has a weakness. It can't control the internet when the story arrives through first-person claims and spreads faster than PR can respond. When allegations hit social media, the usual strategy, silence, negotiation, time, often fails. The audience doesn't wait for a studio statement. The audience wants an answer now. So part 2 is about the myth, how it was manufactured, why it felt unbreakable, and why a scandal in the social media era doesn't just damage one person. It detonates a whole network of companies that bet their reputation on a single face. And then, in 2021, the myth met a force stronger than marketing: the public's appetite for accountability, amplified by platforms that reward outrage and speed. If you want to understand why the fall was so brutal, watch the incentives. A star at this scale becomes a safe bet for everyone around him until the bet turns toxic. That's why the early phase of any scandal is filled with delay. Managers want time, brands want distance, platforms want stability, and fans want certainty. But the internet doesn't grant time. It rewards speed. And in China's celebrity ecosystem, speed can look like instant erasure. The same platforms that lift a superstar can also freeze their visibility overnight. When the feed stops showing you, your empire doesn't just slow down, it collapses in public. That's the cliffhanger at the end of the rise. The myth wasn't built to handle scrutiny. It was built to handle admiration. And the moment admiration flips into investigation, the entire architecture starts shaking. Every celebrity fall has a first domino. The moment the story stops being whisper and becomes an allegation people can quote. In Kris Wu's case, the online accusations in 2021 triggered a chain reaction that looked almost instant. Social platforms filled with commentary, brands began distancing themselves, and the safe celebrity image started to fracture in public. He denied wrongdoing. That denial matters in a timeline, because it shows what the public conflict looked like before the legal conflict. In the early stage of any scandal, there's always a war of narratives. One side says harm happened, the other says it didn't. The audience becomes judge, jury, and viral amplifier, often before investigators ever speak. But the reason this scandal kept growing wasn't only the volume of conversation, it was the way the conversation forced institutions to choose sides fast. Brands are allergic to uncertainty. The moment a celebrity becomes high risk, contracts become liabilities. So the sponsor stampede becomes a visual of the market protecting itself. This is where you can show your viewer what soft power looks like in real time. A star can be removed from campaigns in hours. A poster can be edited overnight. A brand can issue a one-paragraph statement and pretend the relationship never existed. And an entire public identity, built for a decade, can be erased by corporate decisions that happen behind closed doors. Then the case shifted from culture to law. On July 31, 2021, Chinese police announced that Kris Wu was detained on suspicion of rape, a turning point that moved the story from online chaos into criminal procedure. From that line stopped being what people believe and became what authorities do. And once a case enters criminal procedure, the public rarely sees the details. Trials can be closed. Evidence can be private. The internet doesn't get the footage it wants. All it gets is time, and the anxiety of not knowing what will be proven. This is also where public court becomes dangerous. Online, people demand details. But in cases involving sexual violence allegations, details can harm victims and turn trauma into spectacle. The responsible way to keep a viewer hooked is not to sensationalize. It's to show the mechanism, how power and fame can distort normal boundaries, and how a platform-driven storm can pressure institutions to act. Once the detention was announced, silence replaced noise. There were no live streams from a courtroom, no public witness list, no transparent day-by-day trial coverage. That vacuum is exactly what makes audiences obsess. When you can't see the process, you imagine it, and imagination can turn into misinformation. So part 3 ends on the key tension. The internet wanted a story. The state moved into a case. And from that point forward, the next major updates would arrive like thunder, rare, official, and irreversible. In late 2022, the legal system delivered what social media can't: an official outcome. A Beijing court sentenced Kris Wu to 13 years in prison, said he would be deported after serving his sentence. The court also said deportation would follow after prison, another detail that matters in a timeline because it marks an official severing. Not only punishment, but removal. A career built on cross-border stardom ends as a cross-border exit at last. For the audience, that sentence is the hard pivot. It transforms the scandal from debate into record. It also explains why Kris Wu became a symbol inside a larger cultural conversation. China's entertainment world, like many others, has struggled with how to handle powerful celebrities accused of serious harm. This case became one of the most high-profile examples of a public figure facing a major criminal penalty. Then came the aftershock stage that many viewers forget: appeals. In July 2023, a Beijing court began hearing his appeal. With-he proceedings were not open to the public to protect privacy. And on November 24, 2023, Reuters report court rejected his appeal, meaning the 13-year sentence stood. That appeal denial is the moment the story hardens into history. In case file language, it's the door click. The last "what if" gets reduced to paperwork. From there, the timeline stops moving forward in dramatic beats and starts moving forward in years, one day at a time. But we can't end Part 4 on a court stamp alone because the emotional core of this story isn't legal. It's cultural. The bigger lesson is what fame does to accountability. Fame creates distance. It creates intimidation without words. It creates a public that wants to protect the brand because the brand feels like their identity. And when a court outcome finally arrives, it forces everyone to confront what they were defending. Notice the structure of the legal arc: investigation, closed proceedings, verdict, sentence, appeal, denial. It's not cinematic, but it's final. And the closed-door element matters. Chinese courts cited privacy protection for victims, which means get the kind of transparency Western audiences expect. That lack of visibility created a weird paradox. People who wanted accountability had to trust a process they could not watch. Fans who wanted to defend him had fewer public details to argue with. Everyone was forced to accept the one thing nobody can spin: the sentence number. 13 years is not a cancellation. It's time. It's the state saying the era is over, L was rejected, the last escape hatch disappeared. So the real cliffhanger isn't what happens next. The cliffhanger is what happens to a culture when its biggest myths collapse into court records. The internet wants clean endings. It wants a villain, a verdict, and a fade-out. Real scandal doesn't fade out. It changes form. After the verdict, the Kris Wu story became less about one celebrity and more about what his rise and fall revealed. The vulnerability of fans to carefully curated images, the ability of corporations to profit from a persona until the persona becomes radioactive, and the slow, silent weight of criminal process that arrives long after the online firestorm. This is also where you can widen the lens without losing focus. Kris Wu's case sits inside a global pattern. The Me Too era accountability colliding with celebrity industries that were built to protect stars. The public wants safety. The market wants money. The legal system wants proof. Those three desires rarely align at the same moment, and when they collide, a single name becomes a symbol. But the most important thing to say, because it keeps the channel credible, is this: case files are about what can be proven, not what can be imagined. A sentence is not a social media opinion. It's a legal conclusion. So what is the legacy? For some viewers, it's a warning about idol worship, the danger of confusing performance with character. For others, it's a warning about platforms, how fast accusation becomes entertainment and how little protection there is for ordinary people when power and fandom combine. And for the industry, it's a reminder that brand safety is not morality. It's risk management. When the risk becomes too big, companies cut ties. They don't hold trials. They don't wait for nuance. They move. So here's our off-camera loop ending, the last beat that makes the viewer sit with the story after the credits. Kris Wu built a career on being the face everyone trusted. Then the public learned that trust can be manufactured and consequences can be real. If you're building scandal content for a Western audience, here's the retention trick that's also ethical. Don't promise secret lists or hidden names. Promise clarity. Promise a timeline that doesn't exploit victims. Promise that you'll separate allegation, denial, and legal outcome, and you'll say, "We don't know," when the record doesn't prove something. Because the long-term value of a channel like Off-Camera Chronicles isn't shock. It's trust. In high-stakes cases, trust is what makes people watch to the end and come back for the next file. And that's the final loop. Fame creates a myth. The myth creates protection. Protection creates distance. And distance can enable harm. When the myth collapses, the audience learns the same lesson again, just with a new face. So when you finish this episode, don't ask, "How could he fall?" Ask the harder question, who helped build the myth so tall that it could only end in a crash?